All right, so today we're going to get into something really fascinating. We're breaking down a pretty provocative psychoanalytic critique of the famous author and activist Arundhati Roy. The source material is an essay by Bholanath Vishwakarma, and he argues that there's a direct line between Roy's personal life and her public activism. It's a lens that really makes you think, not just about what someone believes, but why they might believe it. So, let's dive in. And really, the entire critique pretty much hinges on this one powerful quote from Roy herself. The author, Vishwakarma, basically uses these words as the key to unlock what he sees as the psychology behind her politics. He kicks things off by asking a pretty pointed question. Is this the reason she sees a democratic country like India as unsafe and feels a need to, in her own words, make it so?
So, what's the big idea here? Well, the author's main point is that Roy's traumatic childhood, especially her relationship with her mother, isn't just some side note in her life story. He argues it's the actual blueprint for her entire political worldview. According to his analysis, her fight against the state is really just her projecting her personal struggles with her mother, her first authority figure, onto a much bigger stage. Okay, so here's our game plan for walking through this critique. We'll start with that core thesis. Then we're going to look at the author's take on Roy's writing style and her record as an activist. After that, we'll get into the real heart of it, this Mother Mary theory. And we'll finish up with a very pointed question the essay leaves us with.
All right, let's jump in. First thing the author does is he really zooms in on Roy's language, her writing style. He makes the case that her nonfiction isn't just about laying out facts. It's designed to make you feel something very specific.
He even uses this Pied Piper analogy, The idea is that her writing is so beautiful, so lyrical, that it just kind of pulls you in, especially if you're a younger reader. He claims it's so full of these literary tricks that the powerful emotional appeal can sometimes push a more straightforward logical debate off to the side.
And one specific tool he points to is something he calls the rule of three. You'll see it a lot in her writing. It's this pattern of using three phrases, one after the other. It creates this rhythm, It gives her words a ton of emotional power, almost makes them feel like a chant.
And here's another one. He calls this the tricolon of despair. Again, see that pattern? 3 questions. The effect is to create this feeling of, despair. It takes these huge, complicated political issues and makes them feel incredibly urgent, stark, and deeply personal.
Okay, so we've talked about her writing style, but how does that connect to her activism? Well, after she won the Booker Prize, she became this huge public figure, right? And this is where the author starts to examine what he describes as contradictions in her public positions.
Specifically, the essay hones in on these 4 big areas. We're talking about her stance on everything from big dam projects and nuclear weapons to her support for separatist movements in Kashmir and the Naxal insurgency. He analyzes all of this to build his bigger psychological case. One of the first things he points out is what he sees as a kind of irony, right? Roy becomes this major voice against globalization and corporate capitalism, but, as he points out, her international fame and, her financial success were products of that exact same global system.
Now, this is a really key part of his argument. He says, look, when Roy attacks things like the Narmada Dam or the tough AFSPA law in Kashmir, she always blames this big, vague entity called the Indian state. But the author claims she consistently seems to avoid calling out the Congress Party by name, even though, according to his research, they were the ones who got these policies started. For him, this isn't just an oversight. It's part of that bigger psychological pattern he's tracing.
And that leads us right to the heart of this whole thing, the psychoanalytic theory that tries to tie it all together. This is where the author attempts to draw a straight line from Roy's childhood trauma directly to her political ideology. To do that, he uses Roy's own words about her mother, Mary Roy, which are just incredibly powerful. She was my shelter and my storm. That one line says it all, doesn't it? This idea that one person could be your safe place and the source of your fear, that contradiction is everything for this theory. And this next quote just drives that point home even more. The idea that you have to leave someone you love just so you can keep loving them? Wow, that really speaks to how complex things must have been. And it's this picture of a really turbulent home life that becomes the entire basis for the author's psychological diagnosis.
So the author brings in a specific psychological term for this. It's called disorganized attachment. And it's basically what can happen when the person who is supposed to keep you safe is also the person you're afraid of. The argument is that Roy developed this attachment style and that it didn't just stay in her childhood. He claims it became the blueprint for how she relates to any authority figure later in life.
So here's the author's chain of logic laid out nice and clear. Step 1, childhood trauma. Step 2, that trauma leads to this disorganized attachment pattern. And step 3, the big leap. She then externalizes it. She takes all those feelings about a controlling, difficult parent and projects them onto the Indian state. The state, in her mind, becomes that abusive and controlling authority.
And that is the central metaphor. The author is basically saying that Roy's political fights are, on a subconscious level, just a replay of her childhood battles. The state, with its dams, its army, its policies, becomes the ultimate Mother Mary, a huge, powerful figure that's supposed to protect and nurture, but from her perspective, only ends up controlling and destroying.
So after all that, after this deep psychoanalytic dive, how does he wrap the whole thing up? Well, it's pretty interesting. He takes that rule of 3 we talked about earlier, her own writing trick, and he turns it right back on her with some really tough questions.
Yeah, the source ends with these 3 really provocative questions, framed in her own signature style. He asks, does she love the environment more than poor Indians? Does she hate India more than she values security? Does she hate Hindus so much she supports terrorism? It's a pretty intense way to end it, and it leaves you thinking about the core idea of this critique. How much of what we believe politically is really shaped by the things that happen to us personally?